Welcome to the Christian Life Coach Collective. I'm your host, Laura Malone, and you are in the right place if you want to make an impact in your life and the lives of the people around you. Maybe you even want to turn your gift of helping others into an income so you can support your family and your dreams and make a way for your calling. I'm here to guide you because you deserve to have encouragement and resources and somebody invested in you as you go invest yourself into everyone else. Let's dive into today's episode. Hey there, friends. We've been talking about hope in the storm, and today I'm going to talk about survivor's guilt. It's a form of self-reproach, and there's emotional distress that comes with it that a lot of people experience after having survived a situation where other people lost their life or their homes, their belongings, their health, or other just important aspects of life. So it's kind of considered a psychological phenomenon, and it's very common among trauma survivors, accident survivors, military veterans, anybody who's gone through something that would be really considered catastrophic to the soul or the body. And survivor's guilt manifests in a sense of unearned continued life, unearned ability and capacity. Like, I don't deserve this because somebody else doesn't have it. Basically, it makes a survivor question, why was I spared when somebody else wasn't? For those struggling with survivor's guilt, God, He offers so much compassion and comfort throughout Scripture. But Psalm 34:18 says that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. So leaning into the Lord through prayer, reading the Word, meditating on the Word, that helps to create a sense of peace and purpose and hope and security. So let's talk about what survivor's guilt really looks like and how to recognize the symptoms of it. The first thing I would say, because you know how I feel about just managing your thought life, being aware and knowing what's happening in your thoughts, what's going on in your paradigm, your belief system, your imaginations. So intrusive thoughts, like persistent thoughts about the trauma, the event, with a focus on who or what did not survive. Those kinds of thoughts, that is specifically linked to survivor's guilt. This pervasive, I have to think about it. I can't not think about who didn't make it. The idea that other people lost everything and I didn't lose everything, So those types of intrusive thoughts are definitely a main root symptom of survivor's guilt. Sadness and depression, a prolonged sense of deep sorrow, a prolonged lack of joy, and definitely when there's a feeling of hopelessness associated with it. And I know, obviously, that sadness and depression are part of life. They come and go for a lot of things. But when you connect sadness and depression to some of these other symptoms of survivor's guilt, then you'll know, it's connected to intrusive thoughts. And we also might have any one of the rest of these symptoms. So that's how you'll know the sadness and depression is connected to it. And self-blame and shame is another. Survivors might believe they didn't do enough or they should have done something different, and trying to figure out, how could I have changed things? How could I have been in a different place? Maybe I would have died instead of them. if my house, if we had built it like we had said on the back of the acreage, maybe my house would have been gone and they would have had room to do this with their house. Like trying to just like, because it's connected to those intrusive thoughts of, man, how could I have done anything different? What is my fault? What's my role in this? And the shame that they survived or their home survived or they came through something that other people didn't. So that self-blame and shame is it might even seem like it's quieter. It's not specifically at the top of the thought process, but it's in there and it pops up and it shows its head every now and then. Also, anxiety and a hypervigilance. So constant fear, constant anxiety, and trying to anticipate or over prepare for trauma events in the future. That's another part of it. Becoming somebody who thinks so far forward, so deep into what could happen and the what if and how can I mitigate? Can I prepare? How can I make sure that we're always safe, always secure, nothing bad will ever happen? All of that hypervigilance can lead to control and manipulation of life in order to create a sense of safety to battle the fear and the anxiety. Other types of avoidance behaviors, like avoiding certain places or activities or people who remind you of the trauma, right? So if you were in a car accident, if you were to decide, I'm never going down that road again, bad things happen on that road, that would be an avoidance behavior. I am never going to play golf again because, my friend who died in the car accident, he played golf all the time. I don't deserve to be able to play golf when he can't. Or maybe maybe he didn't die. Maybe he suffered some type of accident and he can't do an activity, but the survivor says, well, I don't deserve to be able to do that activity. I'm going to avoid it. Or maybe the trauma happened during an activity and you would avoid doing that activity again, or anything that reminds you of it, makes you think about the activity. And then being around people who remind you of the trauma, the event, the loss. Those type of avoidance behaviors definitely point to survivor's guilt. Physical symptoms are always going to be there with anything, with compassion fatigue, like we talked about, caregiver's fatigue, survivor's guilt, all of these things that psychologically, emotionally, mentally will always be manifesting physically in some way. So that, you have to think about headaches, fatigue, stomach problems, changes in sleep, all of that stemming from the strain on your psyche, on your soul, right? It is going to manifest physically because everything does. And then I can't go without saying suicidal inclinations. If a survivor believes that they should have died or just simply cannot go on the way things are, for if they just can't imagine living without who or what they lost, or have thoughts of ending their life to bring like their own sense of justice, that's definitely a fruit of survivor's guilt, is thoughts that lead to that. And it starts with the intrusive thoughts. It goes and weaves its way through sadness and depression and self-blame and shame and anxiety and avoidance. And all of those things can lead to suicidal thoughts. So I will say too, these symptoms often overlap PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And they have to be considered. If there's been a traumatic event, it's really important that if you are the survivor, that you're like paying attention to what's happening in your mind, in your heart, and in your body, And if you know somebody who's been through something traumatic, then pay attention to these things. It's important also that at some point, as a survivor of something, that you stop to acknowledge your own life purpose, like Jeremiah 29:11 says. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, your Lord. He's got plans for good, not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. So that verse is a reminder that God has a specific plan for each one of us. Survivor's guilt is something that we can actually reframe as a calling to live our lives and do the things that we're called to do for good and carry forward the love and the memory of all that's been lost, of who's been lost, right? So there are a lot of different events that can cause survivor's guilt. And some of the things that happen are more tangible and seen than others. So, for example, if somebody is in a severe car accident, right, and they walk away with little to no injury, but other people are seriously hurt or killed, then that survivor might wonder what could they have done differently and why they came through okay physically when others didn't. It's like a tangible situation because what happened is known to anybody who knows there was a wreck, right? You expect that there are challenges that come with having been in a wreck. And so people can see more clearly that the person might experience survivor's guilt because they know a traumatic event happened. It's the difference between seeing somebody who has a broken leg and seeing somebody who has an autoimmune disease. One, the person with an autoimmune disease might actually be walking around with a severe nerve pain all day long, and you might not open the door for them in the way that you would know that the person on crutches with a broken leg could use your help. One is tangible and seen, and one is less tangible or intangible and unseen. So, like a family's home might be, more unaffected while neighbors suffer like really, significant damage or loss from flooding or a tornado or such. So a survivor whose home stays unaffected might question, why was their home spared and others weren't, and feel guilty. They have their house and belongings and a place to live when other people were displaced and have lost so much. And we're seeing that a lot in Asheville, North Carolina after Hurricane Helene. It's so hard to deal with this type of event because there's usually nothing somebody could have done differently in a natural disaster. So there's a lot of just a sense of hopelessness and powerlessness that cycles alongside the survivor's guilt because it causes you to say, I should have done something, but there was nothing I could do. Like, how can you can't stop the rain. You can't stop the flood, right? So you feel this sense of I should have, but I couldn't have. And when you connect that to survivor's guilt, it can get kind of gnarly up in there. Considering that, you really have to stop and manage that thought process. If you're feeling this way, if you're thinking this way, you have to stop and say, what could I have done? And maybe actually take an inventory. Could I have done anything to prevent this, to mitigate it? If somebody was in a mass shooting incident, they might find themselves feeling guilty for saving themselves because their brain said run, right? Or even just for simply being alive at all, especially if somebody's like in close proximity to somebody who's shot during a mass shooting, then the guilt, that survivor's guilt, can really lead to feelings like overwhelming personal, what's the word? Starts with an R. Like a reproach towards themselves. And I would say this kind of survivor's guilt is so especially intense because events like that are so random. in nature. They're so meaningless. They're so unjust. They're so evil. And it just does not make sense to the brain, to the soul, to the body, right? Then you have things like pandemics. I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on with my throat. And surviving pandemics is really true for people like healthcare workers who saw so much loss during the Rona, and people whose immune systems didn't succumb to the virus as easily, or people who recovered when other people didn't. And then there's also military personnel who survived combat when comrades didn't, thinking maybe they should have done more to save them or made different decisions, or that it should have been them to die and not their buddy. All of these are kind of less tangible events that lead to survivor's guilt as well, but there's the things where people might not see what's going on inside. Like I said, something nerve pain versus a broken leg and crutches. How visible is what you're going through to the outside world? That impacts the world's ability to notice and be aware that there might be something going on inside. The compassion fatigue is, in addition to the survivor's guilt, if they stay unseen, if you shove them down, suppress them well, hide them, cover them up, then you won't have as many people able to help you because they don't know what's going on. So there's also things like, I would say, life events where maybe your son or your daughter survives a drug overdose while somebody else's child didn't, or maybe just not getting fired when the rest of your department loses their jobs, finding a way out of poverty, neglect, or abuse when others are trapped. Maybe as a foster kid, you get moved or adopted or moved to a different house, but you know that there's other kids in your house that are being taken care of. Or there's people who don't choose to leave, or they're unable to escape. And that includes trafficking victims, whether they're being work trafficked or sex trafficked, including made to prostitute themselves. Many who survive or escape know that there's a lot of people who didn't and have to face that truth on a daily basis. And so survivor's guilt can be really, really pervasive in your soul, because you know there's people who didn't make it. And maybe there wasn't death. Maybe they're, we're talking about in natural disasters or things like that. But even if you know that you have survived by making it out, but other people didn't, it's definitely still able to produce survivor's guilt. So recognizing it in yourself or in other people, there's some key things that you can look for besides, what we talked about, the symptoms of it. But really just thinking frequent remorseful language. If somebody's talking a lot and expressing how they have regret or guilt about surviving when others didn't, or overwhelming empathy for what's been lost and who's been lost, an intense focus on the people and the pain that they experienced. Difficulty celebrating. Survivors might feel like they don't deserve joy. They don't deserve to keep going. They don't deserve success. They don't deserve possibilities and new opportunities, right? So just a lack of desire to engage in life and celebrate what's possible and what's happening, and a detachment from things that they love doing, once loved, or loved people. So emotionally withdrawing, that's definitely an area where survivor's guilt, I think is one of the most impacting, a detachment and a withdrawal from life, from the people at home, the people who want to help you the most, when you withdraw from them because you just don't know what to say and you just don't know how to express and explain what you're feeling, it makes so much sense. If you have survivor's guilt and you just don't know how to tell people about it, you don't have language, is like literally why I'm doing this episode. I want to give you language for it, and I want to normalize it and tell you, like, this is normal, that you would experience it, but you don't have to stay in it. And you can get help, and you just need to be able to walk it out and talk it through. You have to start by acknowledging your feelings, like what you're going through. Validate them even to yourself. You have to know, like, this is a common, normal response, and it's actually okay that you feel what you feel. So try not to judge yourself or diminish what you're experiencing, and remind yourself, like, I'm having a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. That's one of the things that we say in crisis and disaster relief and in chaplaincy and in inner healing, like all of these areas, like understanding I'm just having a normal reaction to an abnormal situation helps your brain say, oh, I get it. And also, I've said this on the podcast before, but discern the truth between guilt and shame. I know that it's common in the psychological realm to call what we're experiencing and what we're talking about survivor's guilt. But in truth, the word guilt simply implies you've done something wrong. Shame is actually implying that you yourself are what's wrong. If you actually did something wrong here, there's forgiveness. Bring it to God. He forgives you. It is set as far as the east is from the west. There's hope. If you did something that was actually wrong. So that's where we take inventory and say, like, is there something I did wrong? And if there is that led to what happened, then I take responsibility for it. I confess it. I ask for forgiveness. And there's a freedom in that. But if you believe you are what's wrong, that your life is wrong, your survival's wrong, that's the enemy of your soul wanting you to drown in the shame of it, condemning and shaming you. And there is no shame in Christ. So if there's guilt, there's still hope through forgiveness. But if there's shame, then that's the enemy, and he will break you down. This is where it's so important to manage what's going on in your paradigm and take personal responsibility to do your best and allow God to minister to you and help you by putting on the whole armor of God and quenching those fiery darts of shame and condemnation that are thoughts. You don't have to think. You don't have to believe. You can resist them. Resist the devil and he will flee. That's where it happens. But also go look for support. Talk to your friends and family. Find a therapist. Find a chaplain, a pastor, somebody who can help you talk through your experiences and your feelings. Group therapy with other survivors is usually really helpful because shared experiences offer a more unique support than just talking it out you to another person. When you have group therapy or a group debrief, there's so much more you can see and understand after surviving any kind of trauma and crisis, because other people help you get a different perspective that you didn't have access to without them. And I also just challenge all of the self-blame with rational thoughts and truth. I know it's so easy to feel like you could have done more to prevent the trauma or the event, but you have to remind yourself that honestly, trauma is rarely preventable or controllable. And your survival was not a result of taking anything from other people. Evil happens, pain happens. It's like a universal law, and it's not something you can strive successfully to prevent. And acceptance of this will help you move forward. Cultivate compassion towards you. It's oftentimes easier for people to just show compassion to other people, but not to themselves. And I really challenge you to extend the same grace and compassion that you would offer to somebody else to yourself, and begin speak the same words that you would say to other people. Look into your eyes in the mirror and say those things. When you're feeling depressed, when you begin to berate yourself for existing or for enjoying life, look at your eyes in the mirror and speak compassion and grace and life into your soul. Your eyes are the portal into your soul. That's why it's so important what goes into them. So speak into your eyes. When you pray for somebody, look into their eyes instead of closing your eyes. Practice that, declaring the truth into somebody's soul by looking through their eyes. So powerful, but do it for yourself. And do things that, as like an act of remembrance or service or charity, to honor people who have been lost, and channel your emotions in a more constructive way. And make sure to take time for self-care, physical, mental, and emotional self-care, like exercise and proper sleep, but also journaling and go take a walk in nature, do things that help create a healthier mental environment and promote healing in your soul, and embrace self-forgiveness. 1 John 1:9 says that if we confess our sins, he's faithful and just and will forgive us our sins and purify us from all unrighteousness. Survivor's guilt, usually it stems from that self-blame and the shame. But God reminds us forgiveness is available even for perceived failures. So like I said, guilt is if you actually did something wrong, and great news, you can be forgiven. But shame is something that happens because you believe you've done something wrong. But in fact, it doesn't mean that you have. Perceived failure is very different from real failure. Healing from survivor's guilt, it's just never going to be an overnight thing, right? But if you walk through these things and you have compassion towards yourself and you get support, and you actually take time to validate what you're feeling and not shame yourself for it, and you have compassion and forgiveness towards yourself, and you take care of yourself. Let's not forget relying on God, leaning into him. You can find peace and purpose again, because survivor's guilt, it doesn't have to define your story. It's a real part of a real journey that can actually lead you to a place of deeper compassion for other people. There can be gratitude and faith in your future, purpose, and like that future of hope that God has for you. Life is a gift, and all good gifts are from the Father above. So choosing to honor the life you've been given, as well as the lives that have been lost or harmed or changed, that can actually serve as a testament to the past and the way things used to be that we want to remember, the lives that we want to remember. So survivor's guilt is deeply personal to every person, and it's going to take time to go through the process. There's no formula, there's no right way, there's no perfect timing. But if you connect yourself to community and find counseling and lean into God's grace, there's hope, there's healing. So I invite you, I encourage you to reach out to other people for support, church, support group, therapy, anybody. Go to church and ask somebody, has anybody ever struggled with this? Can I talk to somebody who's been here before? You have to remember you're not alone in this journey. And if you see somebody who you know has been through something traumatic, maybe ask them some questions and ask them, do you need to talk? If it's not me, can I help you find somebody to talk to? Healing takes time, but God is really faithful to be with us every step of the way. So I hope that this has been a blessing to you. If this is an area that you feel stuck in, or you didn't understand was even a thing, some people have never even heard of survivor's guilt. And it's the same thing with compassion fatigue. And when I mention it and I suggest this might be something that you're dealing with, do you want to talk about it? Can I send you information? And it's like when people's eyes open, it's such a beautiful thing to see somebody have this revelation of, wow, that's like the language. You're giving me language for what I feel. And I never knew it was a thing. I never knew there was a way to define it, like a label for what I'm experiencing. And it's so clarifying, and that actually brings a lot of freedom. Again, just having a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. So bless you, friends. Talk to you in the next episode, and have a great day.
If you'd like to work with me and get coaching, become a coach, or start a coaching business, check out all the courses and coaching I offer at sterlingandstonementoring.com, or you can scroll through the show notes to find all the links that you need. I pray that your day will be full of joy, hope, transformation, and the presence of God.